In the quiet coastal town of Port Harbor, Oregon, life often moved at a calm, predictable rhythm. Waves rolled against the docks, children biked down tree-lined streets, and neighbors waved to one another from their porches. To anyone passing by the Hendersons' two-story home on Alderwood Lane, it looked like the picture of peace, the kind of suburban dream people spent their lives chasing. Claire Henderson embodied everything this town admired. She was 38, warm-hearted, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to her family. She volunteered at the local library on weekends, baked cookies for neighborhood kids, and never forgot a birthday. Friends said she had a quiet strength, a natural calm that made people feel safe around her. Her husband, Dr. Ethan Hale, was a respected physician at Northgate Hospital, a man with credentials, charm, and confidence. He had the kind of easy smile that made patients trust him instantly. At social gatherings, he was articulate and polite, the doctor everyone in town seemed to know by name. Together, they looked like a couple that had it all: 2 children, a successful career, and a marriage built on shared ambition and love. But sometimes, the things that look perfect from the outside are the easiest to break apart. Neighbors often saw Ethan jogging early in the morning before heading to the hospital. Claire would wave from the porch with a cup of coffee, her children, Liam, age 5, and Ella, just 3, still in their pajamas, giggling beside her. They'd watch their dad run down the hill until he disappeared behind the oaks. On weekends, the family picnicked near the lighthouse, took photos at the pier, and laughed as gulls fought over breadcrumbs in the wind. In every snapshot, Ethan's arm wrapped protectively around Claire, her smile genuine, unaware of the shadows that were slowly forming behind her. Claire had dreams of her own too. Before marriage, she'd studied early childhood education and had always wanted to open a daycare center. Lately, she'd started talking about it again, the idea of doing something for herself after years of supporting Ethan's demanding career. Friends said Ethan was supportive, though some noticed how his jaw tightened when she mentioned independence. Thursday mornings in Port Harbor were usually uneventful. That day, the sky hung low and gray, carrying the smell of salt and rain. Inside the Henderson home, breakfast was loud, cartoons playing, Liam asking for more syrup, and Ethan reading emails at the kitchen counter. Claire moved through the kitchen in her soft beige sweater, packing a small lunch for the kids before heading to drop them at preschool. Ethan, unusually relaxed, told her he'd take the day off to watch the children later, giving her time to do something for herself. She smiled at the offer, a rare gesture from him. Before she left, Ethan walked over, holding out a small bottle of vitamins. "Don't forget your calcium," he said lightly. "You've been skipping them again." Claire hesitated. She'd been taking them for weeks, or thought she had. She popped one pill from the container, swallowed it with a sip of water, and kissed him on the cheek. "See you later," she said. He smiled. "Have fun with Megan. Don't be late for your movie." The moment seemed ordinary. But sometimes, the worst moments hide inside the ordinary ones. Claire was supposed to meet her best friend, Megan Lowell, at the Harborview Cinema downtown for a matinee showing. They had a long tradition of sister afternoons, an excuse to laugh, talk, and escape motherhood for a few hours. That day, Claire ran late. She had errands to finish, groceries, bank, preschool forms, and by the time she got in her car, it was already past 1:30. She texted Megan. "Running late as usual, grinning face with sweat, be there in 10. Megan replied with a heart emoji and waited near the theater's coffee kiosk, unaware she would never see her friend alive again. As Claire merged onto Wilson Creek Road, she made a quick call to Megan. The conversation started with laughter, something about the weather, the movie, maybe dinner plans. But halfway through, Megan heard a change in Claire's tone. "I don't feel so good," Claire said quietly. "I feel strange." Megan's voice turned sharp. "Pull over, Claire. Are you okay?" There was silence. Then a faint, slurred, "Something's wrong." The line went dead. At 1:55 p.m., witnesses saw a silver SUV drifting slowly across Wilson Creek Road. The car bumped another vehicle before coming to a stop near the curb. It wasn't fast or violent, just unnerving. A nurse driving home from a shift noticed the odd angle of the SUV. She pulled over, thinking the driver might be having a seizure. When she opened the car door, she found Claire slumped against the seatbelt, eyes open but unfocused, vomiting uncontrollably. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was pale, her pulse erratic. There were no injuries, no sign of trauma, no broken glass, no bruising. Something internal was happening, something rapid and devastating. The nurse called 911, her voice shaking. "She's conscious but not responding, she's vomiting a lot, I think she's been poisoned." Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed Claire to Riverside Medical Center. At 2:20 p.m., Ethan received a call from the hospital. A calm, professional voice informed him that his wife had been in a minor accident and was being treated. According to hospital records later obtained by investigators, his first words were not of panic or confusion, but a controlled, "What's her condition?" He arrived 20 minutes later, leaving the children with their babysitter. Witnesses remembered how he entered the ER, not frantic, but focused. A nurse later said, "He looked like a doctor coming in to check on a patient, not a husband terrified for his wife." Doctors worked for 45 minutes trying to stabilize Claire's heart rhythm. They intubated her, administered medication, shocked her twice. But nothing worked. Her body resisted every effort. At 3:17 p.m., Claire Henderson was pronounced dead. No visible injuries. No medical history. Just, gone. News spread quickly through Port Harbor. A healthy woman, mother of two, dead after a simple fender bender, it didn't make sense. Her best friend, Megan, couldn't shake their last conversation. She told Claire's brother, Daniel Carter, about the call, how Claire said she'd felt sick right after taking her calcium pill that morning. Daniel, a lawyer by training, knew something was off. He contacted the coroner, insisting on a full toxicology report. When the results came back, there was nothing conclusive, at least not yet. But the feeling of unease was growing. Meanwhile, Ethan comforted the children, appeared on local news thanking the community for their prayers, and even hosted a quiet memorial at their home. People praised his composure, how strong he was, how calm. But behind the smiles and condolences, rumors began to stir. Because sometimes grief looks too controlled. And sometimes the most peaceful faces hide the darkest secrets. The day had started like any other Thursday in Port Harbor, but by early afternoon, the sun hung behind a thick haze and a thin curtain of sea mist rolled in from the coast. To anyone watching, Claire Henderson's silver SUV gliding down Wilson Creek Road was an ordinary sight, a mother on her way to meet a friend. But for Claire, something felt off the moment she turned the key in the ignition. Her head throbbed lightly. A metallic taste coated her tongue. She assumed she hadn't eaten enough breakfast. Maybe too much coffee. Maybe nothing at all. She adjusted the rearview mirror and told herself it was just stress. She had a movie to catch, a rare afternoon without the kids, and she was determined not to ruin it. At 1:53 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was Megan Lowell, her closest friend. They'd been friends for over 15 years, the kind of bond where one word could carry a whole conversation. "Hey, you on your way?" Megan asked. "Always late, you know me," Claire laughed. "Don't make me eat the popcorn alone." "Save me the front row," Claire said. "I'm driving by the," her voice faded. There was a pause, then a shaky breath. "Megan. I don't feel so good. My chest feels weird." "What?" "Claire, pull over." "I think I'm," the line cut out. Megan froze. She called back twice, no answer. She texted, "Are you okay?" "Nothing." Something inside her stirred, a gut feeling she couldn't explain. Within minutes, she was already in her car, heading toward Wilson Creek Road. A few minutes later, a passing driver noticed a silver SUV drifting slowly across the lane. It bumped the rear of a blue sedan, then rolled to a stop near the curb. It wasn't a crash, just a gentle impact, but the car didn't move again. A nurse named Laura Fenton, on her way home from a 12-hour shift, pulled over. She recognized the look immediately: slumped shoulders, unfocused eyes, the mouth partly open as if gasping for air. She rushed to the driver's side, yanked open the door, and found Claire Henderson barely conscious, vomiting into her lap, her skin ashen. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with me," Laura shouted. No response. Only a low, wet sound as her lungs fought for oxygen. Laura immediately dialed 911. "I have a female, mid-30s, unresponsive, breathing shallow, possible poisoning or medical emergency. Wilson Creek near mile marker 14. Paramedics arrived within 5 minutes. They cut open the seatbelt, lifted Claire onto a gurney, and worked furiously inside the ambulance. One of them asked Laura, "Was there a crash?" She shook her head. "No damage. She just collapsed." To anyone watching, it looked less like a car accident and more like someone had simply died while driving. At 2:08 p.m., Claire arrived at Riverside Medical Center. She was placed in Trauma Bay 3. The team worked in controlled chaos: EKG pads, 4 lines, oxygen mask, code cart ready. Her heart rate was irregular, blood pressure dropping. But something about her presentation didn't add up. There were no signs of impact, no head injury, no bleeding. It was as if her body was shutting down from the inside. Dr. Stevens, the attending physician, muttered, "This doesn't look like trauma. Get toxicology ready." They intubated her, started epinephrine, pushed atropine, and watched the monitor flatline and jump again, flatline, jump again, then nothing. At 3:17 p.m., Claire Henderson was pronounced dead. When Dr. Ethan Hale arrived at the hospital, he walked straight to the nurse's station and asked, "What's her status?" Not, "Where is she?" Not, "What happened?" Just those 3 words, detached, clinical. A nurse later recalled his expression as unervingly calm. She remembered how he stood beside his wife's body for only a few seconds, touched her hand, and then walked out to the hallway to make a phone call. No tears. No shock. Just a quiet, measured voice telling someone, "She's gone." He sent a text to friends and colleagues later that evening, "Wanted you to know Claire passed today after a minor accident. She'll be missed." The message spread quickly around the hospital, and with it, a strange sense of unease. It was too formal. Too controlled. Even for a doctor. That night, Claire's brother Daniel Carter sat in his kitchen staring at his phone. Megan's voice from earlier still rang in his head. She said she felt sick right after taking her pill. Pill? What pill? The next morning, Daniel called the medical examiner and asked for a full autopsy and toxicology panel. The examiner agreed, but warned that these tests took time. When Daniel hung up, he felt that cold certainty that comes from instinct: something had been done to her. Meanwhile, Ethan was already planning the funeral. He chose the songs, the flowers, even the guest list with unflinching precision. At the service, he stood at the altar, children by his side, and delivered a short, stoic speech. "Claire was the heart of our home," he said. "She taught us kindness and patience. We'll honor her by living with those values." Polite applause followed, if you can call it that, then whispers among neighbors. He didn't shed a tear. He looked like he was at a board meeting. Megan sat in the back row, hands trembling. She knew what she'd heard on the phone. Claire had said it plainly, "I feel sick after taking that pill." She waited until the last guest left, then approached Daniel. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. You need to check what he gave her, she said. Those vitamins. He was the one who made her take them. That evening, Ethan sat in his study. The house was silent, the kids asleep, the lights dimmed. He opened his laptop and scrolled through emails from the hospital. Then he stopped at one draft he'd never sent. I can't keep doing this. Something has to change. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, mocking him. He deleted it, closed the screen, and reached for the bottle of vitamins on his desk. He turned it slowly in his hand, then slid it into a drawer and locked it. Upstairs, in the children's room, the nightlight glowed softly across two sleeping faces. Ethan paused at the door for a moment and whispered, I did what I had to. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a call from the county coroner. The voice on the other end sounded uneasy. Mr. Carter, the autopsy didn't show any trauma or disease. We're running extended toxicology. Nothing yet, but something feels off. Daniel leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. He looked out the window toward the gray sky over Port Harbor and said quietly, I know. Life in the Henderson home continued as if nothing had happened. Neighbors brought casseroles. The press printed obituaries about a devoted wife and mother. Ethan smiled politely, thanked everyone, and returned inside to his empty house. But Megan couldn't let it go. She visited Daniel again, bringing a small note Claire had left in her car, a receipt for vitamins from a pharmacy near Northgate Hospital with Ethan's signature on it. She never bought her own supplements, Megan said. He did. So he controlled what she took, Daniel replied. Exactly. Together, they made a plan, quiet at first. They would speak to the detectives, show them the receipt, and ask for permission to retrieve the bottle from the house. If Ethan had nothing to hide, he wouldn't mind. But when they called him that night, Ethan agreed too easily. Sure, he said, I have nothing to hide. Come by tomorrow. That should have been a relief. Instead, it sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Because guilty people who think they're safe always sound confident. The next morning, detectives would walk through the Henderson house for the first time. They'd open the kitchen drawer, lift the bottle of vitamins, and uncover the first real clue in what would become one of Port Harbor's most disturbing cases. Because inside those ordinary-looking capsules lay the truth about how a perfect life can turn deadly. The morning after Claire's funeral, the air in Port Harbor was unnaturally still. The town had already begun to move on, but for Daniel Carter, her brother, the silence was unbearable. He drove to the Henderson house with 2 detectives from the Port Harbor Police Department. Their goal was simple, to collect the vitamin bottle Claire had taken from the morning of her death. Ethan Hale greeted them at the door, calm as always, dressed neatly in a blue button-down shirt, not a trace of exhaustion in his voice. Of course, officers, he said smoothly. Take whatever you need. He led them into the kitchen. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching the edge of the countertop where the bottle sat. It was small, white, and unremarkable. Ethan picked it up, handed it over without hesitation. Those are just calcium supplements, he said. Claire always forgot to take them. His tone was polite, distant, as though he were discussing the weather. Detective Harris took the bottle carefully, placed it inside an evidence bag, and sealed it. Ethan smiled faintly. If there's anything else you need, please let me know. I want answers too. When they left, Daniel stayed behind for a moment. He looked around the kitchen, everything spotless, organized, almost sterile. Not a single photograph of Claire in sight. It didn't feel like her house anymore. It felt like a stage that had already been cleaned after the final act. At the police station, the bottle was handed over to the forensic lab for testing. The lab technician, a meticulous woman named Dr. Jane Kessler, began her routine analysis. She expected nothing unusual. But as she dissolved the capsules and tested their contents, something caught her eye. The texture inside a few capsules didn't match standard calcium composition. She double-checked the chemical reaction, then froze. The readings were inconsistent, alarmingly so. She ran a secondary test, this time isolating trace elements. The result made her stomach drop. Cyanide. She ran it again. Same result. 9 of the pills had been tampered with. By late afternoon, the detectives had the results in hand. They gathered in a small briefing room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Detective Harris looked up from the report. 9 capsules. All altered. Cyanide confirmed. His partner exhaled sharply. Jesus. That's enough to kill a dozen people. Harris closed the file. We're no longer looking at an accident. This is murder. Meanwhile, Ethan was already slipping into his next act. That same afternoon, he called Daniel, his voice heavy with what sounded like grief. I just hope they find something, he said. Claire didn't deserve this. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The man's voice made his skin crawl. 2 days later, the toxicology results from Claire's autopsy came back. The levels of cyanide in her bloodstream were staggering, 9.1 milligrams per liter, 3 times higher than what is normally fatal. The coroner, Dr. Livingston, summarized it simply: she didn't die from the crash. She was poisoned. When the detectives informed Daniel, he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the table. Then he said quietly, he gave her that pill. They agreed to move carefully. A search warrant was signed within hours. The next morning, officers returned to the Henderson house, this time with gloves, evidence kits, and cameras. Ethan opened the door, surprised but composed. What's this about? Harris held up the document. Search warrant, Dr. Hale. Step aside, please. They moved through the house systematically. The kitchen, spotless. The living room, lined with framed family photos. The master bedroom, empty, perfectly made. But in the study, one officer found a locked drawer. Inside, there was a small keychain vial, a travel bag with 2 passports, and $8,000 in cash. When questioned, Ethan shrugged. Emergency money. I travel for medical conferences. Detective Harris said nothing. He simply took photographs. By noon, the lab confirmed the cyanide's chemical signature matched the compound found in the altered capsules. They even found traces of the same substance in the kitchen sink drain, likely washed away after mixing. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone had opened the capsules, inserted cyanide powder, then resealed them. Only one person had access to those pills, the man who handed them to Claire that morning. When confronted, Ethan's composure began to crack, but only slightly. Are you accusing me of something? He asked, his tone clipped, defensive. I'm a doctor. I save lives. Harris leaned forward. You're also a husband who had a wife die right after taking pills you gave her. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's absurd. But beneath the confidence, there was a flicker of fear. That evening, Ethan made several calls from his home phone. One to his brother, Michael. Another to an unknown number traced later to a prepaid international line. At 4 a.m., he left a voicemail for Claire's sister-in-law. There's been an emergency, he said calmly. A friend of mine's brother was in a terrible accident in North Carolina. I need to help. I'll be gone a couple of days. When morning came, he was gone. His car was found at a long-term parking lot near Portland International Airport. There was no flight record under his name, no sign of him anywhere. But investigators soon discovered he had a second passport, one issued years earlier during a research exchange in Europe. Under that identity, he had already boarded a connecting flight. The case now shifted from homicide to international fugitive. The FBI was called in. Over the next few weeks, pieces of Ethan's double life began to surface. He had opened secret bank accounts, transferred nearly $150,000, and had multiple online conversations with two women, both nannies he had hired shortly after Claire's death, Isabella Cruz and Monica Ray. The messages revealed more than just flirtation. There were travel plans, promises, and coded language about a new beginning. In one email, sent days before his disappearance, Ethan wrote, "When this is over, we'll finally be free. No more pretending." It became clear that Claire's death wasn't about money or revenge, it was about escape. A new life without consequences. By mid-April, Ethan's trail led to Sierra Island, a small nation off the Mediterranean coast. From there, he moved through a network of contacts into Moravia, a country known for having no extradition treaty with the United States. Investigators believed he was being helped, likely by family connections abroad. In Port Harbor, Daniel and Megan could only watch the news, helpless, as headlines read, "Doctor flees country after wife's cyanide death." Months passed. Then years. The children grew under Daniel's care, too young to understand what had really happened. Ethan's name faded from daily talk but remained an open wound for those who had loved Claire. Until one morning, nearly 2 years later, the FBI received a tip. Ethan Hale, living under the alias Maurice Keefe, had been spotted boarding a flight from Moravia to Sierra Island, a country with strict border screening and an extradition agreement with the U.S. When his plane landed, he was detained. The fingerprints matched perfectly. Back in Oregon, Daniel received a call. "We got him," the agent said. Daniel didn't speak for several seconds. Then he whispered, "It's about time." As Ethan sat in an interrogation room thousands of miles away, silent and expressionless, the world finally began to see the truth. The man who once seemed perfect, the husband, the father, the doctor, had been building his escape long before his wife ever took that final drive. The case that began with a simple bottle of vitamins had now become one of the most chilling betrayals the town of Port Harbor had ever known. The moment the news broke that Dr. Ethan Hale had fled the country, Port Harbor fell into a stunned silence. For weeks, the case of Claire Henderson's death had gripped the town like a ghost story whispered between neighbors. Now, that ghost had a name, and it was running. The morning after his disappearance, Daniel Carter sat in the police station as detectives laid out the timeline. Ethan had packed 2 bags, withdrawn $10,000 in cash, and vanished before sunrise. His phone was off, his car abandoned at the airport. Every clue pointed to a man who had planned his escape long before his wife's death. Detective Harris tapped a folder on the table. "He's gone," he said flatly. But he didn't just run. He disappeared with precision. Daniel stared at the crime scene photo of the vitamin bottle, his jaw tight. "You think he'll come back?" Harris shook his head. "Men like that don't come back. They build new lives." By that afternoon, the FBI had officially joined the case. Agent Melissa Crane, a woman with sharp instincts and no patience for arrogance, arrived in Port Harbor with a portable office of files and maps. Her first order was simple: trace every account, every call, every crossing. Within 48 hours, she had mapped out the route. Ethan had crossed from Oregon to Michigan, then slipped across the border into Canada. From there, he took a flight to Sierra Island, using a fake passport under the name Maurice Keefe. His next destination, Moravia, a country notorious for shielding fugitives and lacking an extradition treaty with the United States. Ethan Hale was no longer a suspect. He was a fugitive doctor on the run. In Port Harbor, the Henderson home stood empty, blinds drawn, the echo of a family that once seemed perfect. Neighbors whispered about the doctor who poisoned his wife. Some defended him, clinging to disbelief. Others nodded grimly, saying they always sensed something off in his smile. Daniel didn't care what anyone thought. He cared about justice. And justice, he knew, was slipping further away with every hour Ethan stayed hidden. Meanwhile, half a world away, Ethan was beginning a new life. In Moravia, he rented a small apartment above a cafe in the capital city, blending easily among foreign faces. He changed his hair, wore glasses, and introduced himself as a consultant for a medical charity. No one questioned him. He was charming, educated, and spoke with confidence. He even found companionship. Within months, he was seeing a local schoolteacher named Naila Suki, a kind woman who believed every word he said about losing his wife in a tragic accident. But even in paradise, paranoia has a way of whispering. Ethan moved carefully. He avoided cameras, paid in cash, and never stayed in one place for long. Yet, he couldn't help himself. He enjoyed attention too much. At bars, he'd drink and brag quietly to strangers, letting fragments of truth slip out. "They think I killed her," he'd say with a grin. "Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Who knows?" Those who heard him thought it was a joke. But one night, a man who wasn't laughing, an ex-security officer named Victor Sandro, overheard the confession and remembered his face. Back in the US, Agent Crane had grown obsessed with tracking Ethan's movements. The trail had gone cold in Moravia, but she kept pushing. Then, in late summer of 2007, a message arrived through Interpol. A man matching Ethan Hale's description had been seen in Sierra Island boarding a flight under the name Maurice Keefe. Crane's pulse quickened. Sierra Island did have an extradition agreement. "This is our chance," she told her team. "If he lands there, we can bring him back." The FBI coordinated with Sierra Island authorities. Agents waited at the airport, scanning passengers disembarking from the small charter plane. When the man stepped out, wearing sunglasses and carrying a leather briefcase, they moved in quietly. "Sir, passport, please," one officer said. Ethan handed it over with a polite smile. Within seconds, the officer compared the fingerprint to the one sent by the FBI. It matched. Dr. Ethan Hale was arrested without resistance. News broke across the United States the next morning: fugitive doctor captured after 2 years on the run. For Daniel and Megan, it was a bittersweet relief. "He's coming home," Megan whispered. Daniel only nodded. "He's coming home to face her." The extradition process wasn't simple. Ethan's lawyers fought it for nearly 3 years, arguing that the charges could lead to the death penalty. The U.S. prosecutors assured Sierra Island officials that they would not seek it. Finally, in January 2009, after countless appeals, Ethan Hale was returned to Oregon under heavy guard. The man who once smiled at cameras and charity galas was now led through the airport in handcuffs, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. When he arrived at the county jail, reporters shouted questions. "Do you have anything to say about your wife's death?" Ethan didn't look up. "She was loved," he said softly, then disappeared into the corridor. Inside his cell, he adjusted quickly. He spent his days reading, exercising, and writing letters no one ever received. His silence unnerved even the guards. "He acts like he's still in control," one said. "Like this is temporary." But outside, the case was being rebuilt, brick by brick. Agent Crane and Detective Harris worked tirelessly, reviewing evidence, witness statements, and lab results. They found new testimony from Michael Hale, Ethan's brother, who finally broke his silence. He revealed that after Claire's death, Ethan had confessed privately, "I gave her the pill. I didn't mean for it to go that fast." It was the confession prosecutors needed. When the trial date was announced, the courtroom filled instantly. Reporters, locals, even former patients came to see the man who had fooled everyone. Daniel sat in the front row beside Megan, hands clasped tight. The prosecution called over 80 witnesses, including Michael, who trembled as he described his brother's guilt. The defense tried to spin the story, claiming someone else had tampered with the pills. But the evidence was overwhelming: the cyanide traces, the fake passport, the flight records, the emails about a new beginning. Through it all, Ethan sat perfectly still, expressionless. During one recess, Daniel passed him in the hallway. For a moment, their eyes met. Daniel said quietly, "You'll never see them again." Ethan didn't answer, but the faint twitch in his jaw said enough. The trial lasted 6 weeks. On March 9, 2010, the jury returned after 9 hours of deliberation. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dr. Ethan Hale, guilty of aggravated murder." Gasps filled the room. Ethan's face didn't change. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of years of waiting. The judge sentenced Ethan to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 20 years. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Daniel spoke briefly to the press. "This wasn't about revenge," he said. "It was about truth. Claire deserved the truth." That night, as snow fell quietly over Port Harbor, the lights of the Henderson home remained dark. Inside a drawer, beneath old photographs and toys, a single untouched bottle of vitamins still sat, a silent reminder of how something so small could destroy everything. Ethan Hale would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but for Daniel, Megan, and the 2 children Claire left behind, the shadow of what happened in that house would never fully fade. And as the ocean waves broke against the Oregon coast, the town that once envied the perfect family finally understood, perfection can be the most dangerous illusion of all. The trial of Dr. Ethan Hale began on a cold January morning in 2010. The courthouse in downtown Portland was packed before the doors even opened. Reporters, former patients, neighbors, and strangers who had followed the case for years all gathered to see the man who had once been called the perfect husband. Now he was known by a different name, the Poison Doctor. The air buzzed with quiet tension, the kind that fills a room when everyone knows the truth but waits for it to be spoken out loud. Ethan entered the courtroom in a dark suit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expression unreadable. He walked with the same careful posture he once used in hospital corridors, confident, measured, detached. He glanced briefly at the gallery but didn't look for his brother, Michael, or Claire's family. For a moment, his gaze stopped on Daniel Carter, sitting in the front row. Daniel stared back, his jaw set, his eyes cold. 2 men connected by love for the same woman, one by blood, the other by betrayal. Judge Marlowe opened the session. The state of Oregon versus Dr. Ethan Hale, charged with aggravated murder. The words echoed through the room like a gavel strike against the heart. The prosecution called their first witness, a forensic toxicologist, who walked the jury through the evidence, the calcium pills, the cyanide residue, the chemical composition. She spoke calmly, clinically, her tone as sharp as the data she presented. "The capsules were intentionally tampered with," she said. 9 contained lethal doses. The amount found in Mrs. Henderson's blood was 3 times higher than the fatal threshold. The jurors shifted uneasily. Some glanced at Ethan. He didn't flinch. Next came Detective Harris. He recounted the investigation, from the first visit to the Henderson home to the day Ethan vanished. "He acted like a man who knew we'd come for him," Harris said. "There was no grief, no confusion, only control. And when he realized we'd found what he'd done, he was already gone." The defense countered by painting Ethan as a devoted husband and a respected doctor, claiming someone else might have tampered with the pills. "There is no direct proof my client mixed cyanide into anything," his attorney said. "No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses. Only assumptions built from grief." But the tide turned when the prosecution called Ethan's brother, Michael Hale, to the stand. The courtroom fell silent. Michael looked pale, haunted. "Did your brother ever speak to you about Claire's death?" the prosecutor asked. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "He told me," he said, voice trembling, "that he gave her the pill, the one that killed her. He said it was quick. That she didn't suffer." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ethan finally moved, just slightly, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing toward his brother. Michael continued, tears pooling at the edge of his eyes. I asked him why. He said he wanted to be free. That she was in the way. The defense objected, shouting about hearsay, but the damage was done. Outside the courtroom, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets ran headlines hour after hour. Doctor's brother confirms confession. People who once admired Ethan now turned their backs. Hospitals stripped his name from their walls. Former colleagues spoke in disbelief. He fooled us all, one nurse told reporters. He smiled like a hero and killed like a stranger. Inside, the trial continued. The prosecution introduced emails, travel records, and photos linking Ethan to the two women he'd been involved with, the nannies, Isabella Cruz and Monica Ray. Messages between them revealed plans to start over in another country. One email read, "Once things settle, we'll finally live without pretending." Another simply said, "No turning back." Then came the moment that sealed his fate. Agent Melissa Crane from the FBI testified about Ethan's escape and capture. He didn't run in panic, she said. He ran with purpose. He created a new identity, new documents, and a new life. That's not the behavior of an innocent man, that's someone who knew exactly what he'd done. Through it all, Ethan sat silently, his expression blank, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad he never looked at again. He seemed more like an observer of his own downfall than a participant in it. When the prosecution rested, the defense tried one last move. They called Ethan himself to testify. He took the stand slowly, adjusting his tie. His voice was calm, precise, the way a surgeon might explain a difficult procedure. "I loved my wife," he said. "I would never hurt her. I've dedicated my life to saving people, not destroying them." The prosecutor rose. "Then why did you flee, doctor?" He paused. "Because I was afraid," he said quietly. "Because I knew you'd already decided I was guilty." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Or because you knew you were?" For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Ethan's face, anger, or perhaps fear. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. The closing arguments came after 6 weeks of testimony. The prosecution spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and control, a man who hid poison behind a smile. The defense pleaded for doubt, for mercy, for the possibility that the truth was different from what it seemed. Then the jury withdrew to deliberate. 9 hours later, the courtroom doors opened again. Everyone stood. The foreman handed a folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Marlowe read the verdict aloud, her voice firm, deliberate. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dr. Ethan Hale, guilty of aggravated murder." The room erupted, gasps, whispers, the rustle of bodies shifting all at once. Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he had held for 5 long years. Megan clutched his hand, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Ethan's shoulders tensed, but his face remained still. He looked up toward the ceiling lights, as though searching for something he'd lost long ago. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 20 years. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like a final heartbeat. That night, outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with snow. Daniel stood under the dim streetlights, staring at the building where it had all ended. "She finally has peace," Megan said softly beside him. He nodded. "Yeah. But peace shouldn't have cost her life." In his prison cell, Ethan sat by the small window, the moonlight cutting across the concrete floor. He held a folded photograph of his children, Liam and Ella, taken years earlier at the beach. For a moment, his mask slipped. His hand trembled. Then he set the picture down and stared into the darkness. Back in Port Harbor, the Henderson house was sold. A new family moved in, repainting the walls, changing the furniture, erasing the ghosts that once lived there. But for those who knew the story, the place would never be just another home. It was where love had turned to silence, and trust to poison. Years later, people in Port Harbor still spoke of Claire Henderson. They remembered her kindness, her laughter, her warmth. The town raised a small memorial near Wilson Creek Road, where her car had come to rest that day. A single inscription read, "She believed in goodness, even when it hid in shadows." For Daniel, life moved on, but the wound remained. Sometimes, he'd drive past the spot and stop for a moment, watching the light break through the clouds over the ocean. It was in those moments that he could almost hear her voice, soft, steady, alive again in memory. Justice had come, but it hadn't healed everything. It never does. And so, the story of the Henderson case faded from headlines, but not from hearts. Because in the end, it wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about deception, faith, and how even the people we trust most can be the ones who destroy us. As the final line of the case file read, the poison wasn't just in the pill, it was in the lie that love could hide forever.